Okay. Welcome everybody to the Virtual Coffee Lunch and Learn edition. My name is Kirk. I will be your sort of lunch and learn coordinator today. We have a wonderful topic. We have with us Bekah Hawrot Weigel, who is going to be giving a presentation on, and I've already gotten muddled through my notes as this is starting, which is bad. There we go. Bekah's going to be talking to us about creating a feedback culture, the key to personal and professional growth. Giving good feedback takes time, empathy, and care. It's not always easy, but it's essential to help others grow and reach their full potential. Giving feedback, being honest, empathetic, specific, and providing an opportunity for discussion. So the best way to provide feedback for each person, written, oral, or a combination, which feels sort of like an evergreen topic, but maybe sort of especially necessary as more and more we try and like foster and create collaborative teams, work remotely, and just like generally move away from the archetype that, like, especially in the tech world, that we operate in silos, but like really embrace the fact that we are a community of people, whether at work or in open source initiatives or in personal endeavors. Bekah graduated from coding bootcamp in May of 2019, spending time as a front-end developer, started the virtual coffee developer community, has spent time in DevRel, and has continued to mom her 4 kids. She currently hosts a virtual coffee podcast, works as the developer experience lead at OpenSauced, tries to work on her postpartum wellness OSS project, and lifts heavy things in her free time. I will also say that she is my absolute BFF, and she's a great person, and she's going to give her talk now, and it's going to be great.
Thanks, Kirk. That was fantastic. I am going to try and share my screen. Okay, where did it go? Let me try this again. Can you see my slides? Yay. Okay, so thanks for listening to my talk today. In the spirit of feedback, if you have feedback after I give my talk, I would like it. Thank you. As Kirk said, I'm Bekah. Prior to coming into tech, I got a master's in English, and I taught college English for 10 years. And one of the most time-consuming and important parts of teaching is giving feedback. So in graduate school, for example, I would write 10 to 30-page papers, research papers, and then I would often get 1 to 3 pages of feedback. I was never really bothered by that feedback because I knew that it was there to help me to improve and to grow and to understand my strengths and weaknesses. So when I became a teacher, I would also provide feedback on my students' papers, their rough drafts, and throughout their entire process, I would give them feedback within their papers and then overall feedback at the end of their papers. And the whole point of giving thorough feedback like this during the whole writing journey was to help the students to discover more about their strengths, and so they could lean into those strengths, but to discover also where they could improve and to understand the steps that they needed to take to improve on those weaknesses. So I want to say this early and hopefully often during this talk: feedback is a gift. At its core, feedback is given to help someone grow. And the problem with not getting feedback is that it becomes much harder to grow, to gauge your progress, and to improve. And so this is part of the reason I've seen a lot of self-taught developers struggle to gain confidence to apply for their first jobs, or for folks going for a promotion or asking for that promotion, or to even make progress on tasks that advance the team or the organization or themselves. And I think this is why it's really essential to build feedback into your project. So it's not just helpful to get feedback, but it's really also important to give feedback and to be open and receptive for feedback. All right, so a little bit about me. As a mom of 4, I am constantly receiving feedback. I don't like this dinner. That's not fair. This actually doesn't taste that bad, Mom. As a maintainer of virtual coffee, we work to get feedback from our members to see how we can improve, what we're doing right, and the things that we can be doing instead. And as developer experience lead at OpenSauced, my role revolves around feedback. So I'm taking indirect feedback from what I hear from the larger tech community and applying it to my work. I am hearing questions in Twitter spaces. How do I get into open source? And that translates into a blog post called Open Source 101, a beginner's guide. I'm taking direct feedback about our product and sharing it with our team, either through conversation, making updates, raising an issue. And it's important to constantly be providing this feedback to the team. This helps us to grow and be better as a team and as individuals. So when we talk about feedback, what does that mean exactly? Well, feedback is information or communication about the results or process of a behavior that's given to a person, a group, or a system. So it's used to evaluate performance, identify areas for improvement, and to guide our future actions. It can be positive or negative, and a little bit of things in between that we'll talk about. And it can be given through various channels. So verbal, written, audio, surveys, other methods. But what we want to talk about when we talk about feedback, we want to talk about it being specific, timely, actionable, and it should be there to help the recipient understand what they did and how they can improve. And so we're going to be talking about all of these things during the talk. It's really important that when you're providing feedback, you do it in the way that a listener can hear the feedback. Otherwise, it's going to be ineffective. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, it means that you have to prime people to receive feedback. So if I'm coming in from the grocery store after a long day of work and I've got 5 too many bags on my arms and you say, I didn't ice the cupcakes in a satisfactory way, I'm probably going to say something like, you do it next time then, right? Like in that moment, I'm not in a space to receive feedback. And for sure, that's not the right way to deliver it. So all of this is kind of an art of giving feedback in a way that is empathetic kind and allows the recipient to be open to feedback. So what does that mean? So I think that when I say priming someone for feedback, I mean providing person-centered feedback to that person. So you want to ensure that you can deliver effective feedback by putting time and energy into developing relationships with the person first. And that means that you understand who that person is, both inside and outside of work or whatever team that you're working on. There needs to be a trusted relationship that's built. One time when I was in high school, I taught swimming lessons. And one Saturday morning, I was teaching a brother and sister, and they were very good swimmers. They were like better than most kids that I taught. But I always have this idea that you can constantly be improving, right? And so I was working with the older brother on his technique, and we made it to the deep end of the pool. And I said, now, when you go back, I want you to try this. And he looked at me and said, don't I ever do anything right? And like, I still get the chills when I hear that now, because I just wanted to help him to improve. And during that period of time, I had forgotten to tell him to provide him with positive feedback. Here are all the things that you're doing right. Good job, Justin, right? And actually his name was Justin, so I'm not just shouting out Justin for being here. But so in that moment, I realized that I wasn't doing a good job of what I should be doing as someone providing feedback. And so as part of using a person-centered approach, that means that you need to be empathetic, you need to be honest, you need to build that trusting relationship. You should be consistent in your feedback and what those expectations are after you provide the feedback. You should also be respectful of that person and recognize that your feedback, you're providing feedback to a unique person. So it shouldn't be blanket feedback, right? It should be unique to that person to show that you respect them. And it should also usually be private feedback. If you give someone public feedback, that often feels like shaming. There can be a time and place where that is effective, but I think it's worth mentioning that almost always the first point of feedback should be in private. And then you should also give clear expectations at the onset of a project and recognize a person's abilities and encourage their growth through the feedback you're providing. Some ways that we can do this is, first of all, recognize that we're all different. So unless you listen to how folks want to receive feedback, you won't be able to support them as teammates when giving feedback. And I had a former teammate who changed teams, I don't know, 6 months or so ago. And when they were onboarded into their new team, one of the things that they had to do was create kind of like a profile of who they are. Like, how do you communicate? What are the things that you enjoy? How do you best receive feedback? And I thought that was such a great idea because for a couple of reasons. One, I think that sometimes we don't even know how we best receive feedback. And so doing a little self-evaluation about what that means can be really important. And then also you're helping that person provide you feedback in a way that builds that trusting relationship. And also you need to provide support for improvement when you're providing negative feedback. So if you're telling someone you are not up to standard for this particular thing that we're working on right now, don't just leave them to go. Like, improve yourself. Help them find ways to improve themselves or provide that support that they need. When we're able to receive feedback, we should be active participants in our growth plan. So that means that we feel valued in what our abilities are and supported in those weaknesses. And when we feel that way, we're more likely to grow and to feel satisfied with our work environments. We can also better understand the expectations and work as part of the team. So this helps us to learn and grow together as well as individually. So when you're taking this time to build that relationship and consider the other person, they'll be more likely to receive your feedback. You'll be a teammate rather than someone on the opposite team trying to block or derail that person. And as part of this, again, I'm going to say the word honesty a bunch of times because that's really important. There should be an expectation of honesty and of understanding what's going to happen. So we should always apply dignity, compassion, and respect as part of the feedback process. And then once you've developed this trusting relationship, you'll be ready to move on and start giving feedback. So when you decide to give someone feedback or when that's needed, which I think we'll talk a little bit about this later, but it should be a continuous culture of giving feedback. It's important that you prepare yourself for giving someone feedback. And so I think it's really important to do a little bit of a self-reflection before you do give that feedback because you want to provide an empathetic response. And I don't know about you, but if I'm having a really bad day, that is the time I will give the most disastrous feedback of all time. So you might need to just pause and give feedback later. And if you give that feedback when you're in a state of mind where you're not, where you can't give good and empathetic feedback, you might end up in a situation where now you not only do you have to undo the negative comments, but you have to repair the relationship. When you have to repair the relationship because you've given feedback in a way that you later regret, that's going to take a much longer time. So here are a couple of questions that I think are important to think about as you're preparing to give feedback. So does my opinion of this person impact the feedback that I'm giving? So maybe you're really close with the person and you don't want to hurt their feelings, so you provide only positive feedback, or you don't provide full feedback because you're afraid of doing that. Or maybe you don't like the person, so you're hypercritical of that person. You need to keep that in mind as you approach this. Think about your own emotional state. Are you calm? Are you frustrated? Maybe somebody has done something that has frustrated you really badly, and you want to provide feedback right in that moment, but that might not be the best time to do it. You might need to step away. What does Daniel Tiger say? Take a deep breath and ask for help. You can do that as well. But always think about giving feedback without your emotional state impacting the situation. Next, you should think about the intention of the feedback. Do you just want them to do things your way? Are you driven by personal biases? Do you just want to criticize them? Or do you genuinely want to see them grow and progress? Also keep in mind, what are the person's strengths? So it can be really easy to get lost in negativity. Maybe they were incredibly productive last month, but this month they've struggled and you're having tunnel vision. You are only remembering what they've done this month. Maybe they're really good at cleaning up legacy code, but now you've asked them to mentor a junior developer on a new feature and it's not going that well. I think it's important to acknowledge their past accomplishments and evaluate if you have equipped them with the tools that they need to succeed. And then finally, what is your relationship with this person and how will that impact your ability to give them quality feedback? And at that point, it depends on what the relationship is, but it also might be worth noting, maybe there's somebody else that can give them better feedback. But I think always doing these quick evaluations can help to give you a fair and constructive and focused feedback that helps the recipients to grow. So once you've done your evaluation, it's important to consider how the other person best receives feedback. So not everyone receives feedback in the same form. And so it's helpful to provide feedback that works for the person that you're giving it to. So there are different ways of doing this, whether it's written, oral, synchronous, or combination of methods. And timing is also important. So the person should expect that feedback is coming. If they're not expecting it, you're creating a scenario where they might be more resistant or even unable to accept that feedback. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about the different modes of feedback. So the first one is written, and this might come most likely through email. This process, I guess, email, text, Slack message, all of these things can be part of written feedback. But it allows individuals to process and absorb the information at their own pace. And it also provides a documented record that you can refer to later. Audio, you can do a voice recording for someone, and that can be, it adds a personal touch. It allows them to hear your voice, and it conveys nuances that might be really difficult to convey in writing. So for example, you might have different tone, emphasis, inflection that helps you to better express what feedback you're giving. There's also verbal, and I guess that audio, I just separated that out thinking in terms of that being a recording. But verbal in video, I guess maybe it should say video, sorry. Asynchronous, so you can do a pre-recorded video. So you can share feedback through pre-recorded videos, and that allows for more dynamic and engaging approach. And it also enables the feedback giver to explain concepts visually and create a more personalized experience. So even think about it in the terms of providing feedback on a product. Oftentimes product designers are, they're either recording it so they can rewatch it later, or you're recording so they can see you navigate through the product, look at your expressions, hear your intonation, and see where you're going with things. And so in a similar way, feedback that is pre-recorded can help provide that full experience. You can also do synchronous methods, which include Zoom meetings. So that could be a feedback session over video conferencing for real-time interaction, clarifications. It makes it nice because you can have instant clarifications, and it can be more of a conversation. So oftentimes one-on-ones become a type of feedback session, and this is a pretty frequent way that folks do that. There's also in-person feedback sessions. This can create a deeper connection and facilitate open dialogue because it does allow for immediate reactions and the opportunity to gauge nonverbal cues. And lastly, you can do a recorded conversation. So record a feedback session, whether it's done in person or through a video call. This can be a reference for the person who's receiving feedback to revisit later and to reinforce the key points discussed. And so one of the things that I want to mention is it doesn't have to be one of these things. It can be a combination of these things, and you can also try different ways of providing feedback. So I know that I was recently talking to a teammate about working on writing, and I asked, like, hey, would you want a recording of me going through your writing as I revise things, or do you want to meet one-on-one and talk through all these? And he was like, oh, both of those would be really great. And so finding ways where people can be receptive, where it can help them grow, is really important to that. I think that it's worth noting that maybe this all might start to seem a little overwhelming, but the more you practice it, the better you get. And so now that is the prep for giving feedback. And let's talk a little bit about what it means to give good feedback. Okay, so first of all, no one wins if you're not honest. Remember, feedback is a gift, and the purpose of feedback is to help other people grow and improve. If you're not honest, you're not giving the person the feedback and the opportunity that they deserve. Part of giving honest feedback means that you have to give different types of feedback. So you might have positive feedback. And I think that, this goes back to that swimming lesson example that I gave. I think it's good to give positive feedback frequently. So it doesn't have to be, I've written something up, or let's have a meeting so I can give you positive feedback. But, general shout outs to your teammates, letting them know they've done a great job on something. All of those are ways to provide positive feedback. And those should all highlight what they've done well. They should be encouraging, they should be motivating, and it should help them to want to continue or even improve in those areas. So, just because you have a strength, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't continue to strengthen those muscles, right? Positive feedback is often specific, genuine, and helps to boost morale and confidence. So one example, this is great. That's not great feedback there. So being a little bit more specific with your positive feedback, like great job on completing your project ahead of schedule. Your attention to detail and efficient work ethic really made a difference. Keep up that excellent work. Okay, so that's a way to provide a little bit more feedback for the recipient so they are better able to understand what is great about what they did. Okay, negative feedback. This is sometimes called critical feedback, and this involves pointing out areas of improvement, mistakes, or shortcomings in someone's work or behavior. So it highlights something that needs to be addressed or corrected. And this is something that folks struggle with all the time, both to give and receive that feedback. But again, the intention here should be to help the person learn and grow. The focus should be on the behavior or the work and not attacking the individual person. And I think that that's worth saying one more time. It should focus on the behavior or work and not attacking the individual personally. So an example of negative feedback would be something like, I don't think you're reviewing your work. Okay, so what does that mean? You should provide a little bit more detail there. Like, hey, I noticed a few errors in the code you submitted. It would be helpful to double check your syntax and run through tests before finalizing. Let's work together so we can help minimize these mistakes, okay? So what you're doing there is providing some context and you're providing support for that person. Let's work together to do this thing. And lastly, here we have constructive feedback. So this is a specific type of feedback that provides some guidance, suggestions, actionable advice, all things to help people improve their work or behavior. So this is a mixture of both positive and negative feedback, focusing on areas for growth and providing actionable steps to achieve improvement. Okay, so constructive feedback should be specific, clear, objective, and delivered with empathy and respect. And we'll talk a little bit more about those things in a couple of minutes. So the intention here is to help the individual develop their skills and their knowledge and their performance. Okay, so an example of constructive feedback would be something like, your presentation had excellent content and organization, but one area of improvement is your delivery. So try to speak at a slower pace and maintain eye contact with the audience just to enhance that engagement. So with practice, you'll become even more of a captivating presenter. Okay, so you provide some positive and negative there, but the intention is to help that person grow. Now, I know there's a popular way of giving feedback where they call it the sandwich method. So you provide positive feedback, then negative feedback, and then positive feedback again. And I think that when you have something really formulaic like that, it can be hard for the recipient because it feels disingenuous, right? And so the goal there should be to consider how you're presenting that feedback and being honest with all of the things, and consider what to just sandwich the negative with two positives just because you think that's what the format should be. You should really take the time to consider what is most meaningful for the person that you are delivering feedback to. Okay, and so as part of giving well-rounded feedback, you should give both specific and general feedback as well. So when you give specific feedback, you're pointing to examples that support the feedback that you're giving. Okay, so for example, if Jack has written 3 blog posts and provided outdated installation instructions in all 3 of the blog posts, you can point to that in your feedback. Hey, Jack, in your last 3 blog posts, you provided outdated installation instructions. Please make sure that you're up to date on our documentation so you can provide the current instructions to our users, and that you proofread your blog post both for grammatical and code errors. This will reduce frustration on the user's end and ensure that they continue to use our product. Try running all your code before sharing your post as an additional way to ensure your code is up to date. Okay, so there's a lot going on in that paragraph, but it identifies what the weakness is, what needs to improve, and why it needs to improve. And I think that that can be really important. So if you're delivering feedback that needs to be acted upon by a person, helping them to understand why that feedback is important is really key to seeing the change in behavior or the change in their work ethic. General feedback will look more at projects or performance holistically and provide a response for that. Okay, so let's go back to Jack. So Jack, in your last series of blog posts, you did a great job of balancing storytelling and technical documentation. This has been a successful way to pull your readers in, as evidenced by your increased number of readers. Continue to use your storytelling skills and work on your proofreading as you move into the next series of posts. So I wasn't really pointing to anything specific. It was generally talking about the approach that was taken. And so let me see. Okay. So talking about the feedback process now, we're moving along. Imagine if you led a team and every day that you worked to make progress and you wanted to exceed your goals and expand your skills. So what if in the first 6 months of leading your team, the CEO said, you're doing a 9 out of, or 10 out of 10. That's pretty great, right? And what if 6 months later, you started sensing some tension with the CEO? You hadn't received any negative feedback. And so you approached them and you said, hey, just wanted to do a check-in. How do you think our team is doing now? And the CEO says, 4 out of 10. Somehow you'd managed to drastically drop and you have no idea why or when it happened. And so then you ask the CEO, what can you be doing better? And they say, I don't know. And then you ask them, well, what can we do to improve? And the response is something else. This may or may not be based on a true story. This happens. It's why feedback is so important. Okay. You can't expect your team to maintain excellence if you can't communicate what excellence is. And you can't expect your team to improve if you keep giving them an invisible target. There's no hitting an invisible target, right? So one way you, so in order to ensure good feedback, we can take a look at each step in this process. So observation. You want to observe the situation, the behavior, or work being evaluated and gather relevant information so you can provide feedback. Interpretation. You want to analyze that data, everything that you have looked at, everything that you've gathered, and you want to look at patterns or areas for improvement. Then you move on to the evaluation phase. You assess the strengths and weaknesses based on that interpretation, and then you form your judgments or your opinions. And then finally, you communicate. You share the feedback in a clear, respectful, and constructive manner to the individual or the team. So this is a process for gathering information. And now we're ready to move on to the effective feedback techniques. So how are you going to communicate this with your team? Well, we got this acronym here. We want to always be honest. So you want to be honest, open, navigational, empathetic, specific, and timely in your feedback. All right, so let's look at these one by one. I've said it, I said the word honest many times already in this presentation, but this is the foundation for meaningful feedback. When we provide this feedback, it's essential to be truthful and sincere and share your genuine thoughts and observations. This promotes trust and enables individuals to make informed improvements based on your assessments. I just want to revisit that self-evaluation that we did at the very beginning, where we talked about make sure that you're in a place to give good empathetic feedback, because I think that there's a difference between being honest when you're angry and honest when you're in a place to give effective feedback. And so I'm going to reiterate the importance of giving honest feedback when you are in a good place to provide feedback. You also want to be open. Okay, this creates an environment where feedback can flow freely without judgment. Okay, so this fosters a culture that encourages dialogue, active listening, and sharing diverse perspectives. So feedback is not a one-way street. It should be a dialogue. It should be a conversation. It should be a developing relationship. This openness should encourage individuals to voice their opinions. It should foster growth and learning for everyone involved. Navigational. This creates a path towards improvement and growth. Okay, so you're not just pointing out flaws, you're offering guidance, support, and direction. Okay, so how does someone improve in this thing? And even feedback like, hey, you're doing great. Like, how, if you ask your manager, hey, how am I doing? And they say, great, it doesn't really help you to grow, right? Like there should be some sense of feedback that helps you to move in a direction of growth where you want to be. And navigational feedback should provide that. Actionable suggestions, identifying those areas of growth, and helping you to set achievable goals to enhance your performance or to move in the direction that you want to be going in. All right, it should always be empathetic. I think that this is a critical aspect of effective feedback. So by putting yourself in the recipient's shoes, feedback providers can better understand the recipient's emotions, their challenges, and their perspectives. It acknowledges the individual's feelings and validates their experiences, and this helps to create a sense of psychological safety, which is key for the recipient receiving that feedback and being able to act on that feedback. So as part of that, you should deliver it with kindness, respect, and consideration for that person's well-being. It should be specific. Specific feedback provides clear and detailed observations about their performance, behavior, actions, or outcomes. And it goes beyond general statements. Okay, so we talked about general and specific, and we need both of those things. But this should provide concrete examples and actions. So both general and specific feedback are good, but to help someone to grow, then you have to provide specific feedback. So for example, instead of saying your presentation was boring, you can say during the presentation, there were moments where the content lacked engagement and the slides contained excessive text without visual aids. That's more specific, and that can help the person to figure out how they can improve. And lastly, it should be timely. So timeliness is crucial for feedback having a maximum impact. You want to provide feedback soon after an event or performance to make sure it remains relevant and fresh in the participant's mind. If you wait months to provide feedback or even years, then it's going to be a lot harder for that person to trust your feedback, both currently and in the future, because it shows that there's not a clear understanding of it's not separating the person's behavior today with their behavior yesterday or their performance. And so it's really important to make sure that that is timely. Again, I want to reiterate, sometimes you need to take a step back, take a deep breath before you provide feedback, because if you are not in a space to provide feedback, then it's going to damage that relationship. So I think the timeliness needs to consider, does this build the relationship or will it decrease trust? And so with timely feedback, it will allow the person to reflect on their actions and then to make necessary adjustments quickly. When you wait too long, it's going to be a missed opportunity for growth and improvement. And 2 more tips. You always want to balance positive and constructive feedback. You want to acknowledge the strengths and achievements of the person alongside those areas that need improved. Balancing these different types of feedback can create that supportive environment and motivate individuals to grow. So again, here's another example. Instead of pointing out flaws in a design, say something like, your design shows creativity and attention to detail. The color palette is appealing and the typography is well chosen. However, it would be beneficial to simplify the navigation for improved user experience. And you also want to focus on behavior and impact. So direct your feedback towards the behavior and not criticizing the person. You want to describe the impact of their actions, whether that's positive or negative, and explain how it affects the team or the project. This approach can encourage reflection and personal growth. So instead of saying something like, you're always late to meetings, say, when you arrive late to meetings, it disrupts the flow of discussion and can make others feel that their time is not valued. Okay, so let's say you're a manager and one of your employees has been consistently missing deadlines. Instead of simply telling them that they need to improve, let's take a look at how we would use constructive criticism. First of all, I think it's always important to start out by asking someone how they're doing. See how things are going in their life outside of work to determine if that's impacting their work. So maybe that frustration, maybe the lack of timeliness is not really, it doesn't have anything to do with work. It has to do with outside stress that they're just bringing into work with them. And once you've worked through that, once you've made sure that you're maintaining that relationship, that trusting relationship with that person, you want to start with positive feedback. Begin the conversation by acknowledging some of their strengths. So you might say, I appreciate your hard work and dedication to this project. And then you want to describe that issue very clearly and very specifically. So you might say, I noticed that you've missed several deadlines recently, and that's causing delays in the project. Explain the impact. Okay, so how is this impacting the team or your organization? This is impacting the team's ability to meet our overall goals, and it's important that we address this issue. And then you can offer suggestions for improvement. So don't just point out the problem. Remember, you need to provide that support there as well. One suggestion I have is to break the tasks down into smaller, more manageable pieces and set interim deadlines to help you stay on track. How can I support you in doing this? Or how can I support you in making the next deadline? When you use constructive criticism in this way, you can help them to understand the issue and feel motivated to improve rather than feeling criticized or defensive. And again, I just want to say all of this with make sure that you've developed that relationship with that person. I talked to a CTO of a consultancy once, and we were talking about dynamics with employees. And a newer employee was really not performing as expected. And the CTO said they weren't really comfortable giving feedback because they hadn't quite developed a relationship with that person yet. So before providing feedback to that person, they just wanted to make sure that they created a place where the person felt safe, where they could trust them. And then they went forward with their conversation. And once I did that, they talked about like, hey, is there something going on? You're working on these projects and these are the expectations, but we see you doing these other things. And it turns out that the employee was not confident in their ability to own a particular project. And once they had the affirmation of the CTO, they started working so much better and with so much more confidence than they had in the past. So what it took was building that relationship, developing that conversation, and checking in with that person to see what was going on. And as part of this, it should always be an opportunity for discussion, right? You don't want it to be a one-way street. For the full benefits of feedback, discussion is essential because it gives the other person an opportunity to ask questions, to go deeper into the feedback, and even get support for developing a plan for improvement. So I want to talk a little bit about overcoming feedback challenges because there can be a lot of them. Like, first of all, accountability. Individuals are responsible for acting on feedback they receive. And the organization as a whole is accountable for creating a culture of feedback. So it's important to have follow-through conversations and to provide opportunities to improve. If you give feedback, but you don't give people a chance to improve, then your feedback is meaningless and you're wasting your time. It can also lead to feelings of you only want to tell me when I'm not good at something. So it's important that the person takes accountability and they make progress, but also there's an understanding of what it means to take accountability. You have to have psychological safety. I think that it's really worth noting that there's a difference between honest feedback and condescending feedback. When the latter happens, it's important to stand up for people on your team. So if you're silent, you're setting the tone. You're not willing to stand up for someone when they're being treated poorly. In a team or a work environment, it's crucial to knowing that distinction. When condescending feedback occurs, it's important that you feel safe to be able to stand up to that condescending feedback as well. There are definitely times where it might hurt your ability to function as a person of that team. And it could be, you can find that you're not in a place of privilege to be able to do that. So I just want to make sure that I recognize this. But it's important to find that if you are in a position to react to condescending feedback, that if you don't, it's going to be as detrimental as participating in the condescending behavior. And actually, it's actively damaging your team, your relationship with your teammates, and the reception of any future feedback. When you do speak up against condescending feedback, you demonstrate your commitment to fostering a respectful and inclusive work culture. So it shows that you value and respect the contributions of your team members, and you're not going to tolerate disrespectful or demeaning behavior. So standing up for others helps to promote psychological safety, boosts morale, and helps to maintain a healthy and productive team dynamic. Another significant challenge can be defensiveness. So people feel defensive when they feel criticized or attacked, even if you have well-intentioned feedback, right? And defensiveness can stem from a sense of fear of failure, a desire to protect your image, a lack of trust in the feedback provider's intentions. But what defensiveness does is hinder open and honest communication, and it makes it difficult to address the areas of improvement that need to be addressed. So to overcome this, it's always important to create a safe and supportive feedback environment. It's important to give the person feedback in the way that they best receive feedback. And it's important not to blindside people with providing them with feedback. Okay, so let them know that you're going to give them some feedback. It's also, you can use the strategy of using I statements to express observations and focus on specific behaviors and actions, not their personality traits. And this can help to reduce defensiveness. You can encourage a growth mindset and emphasize that feedback is an opportunity to learn and grow and to become a positive part of the team. Another challenge is lack of clarity. So if your feedback is vague, ambiguous, or lacking specific examples, it can be difficult for the recipient to understand the intended message or take actionable steps for improvement. So provide that clarity to help the recipient to grow. You can use descriptive language, avoid generalizations, and focus on observable behaviors. And there can be some other challenges too, like emotional reactions. Sometimes it triggers a strong emotional reaction in the giver and the receiver. And the feedback may leave both parties with a sense of frustration, disappointment, or even anger. And this can hurt open and productive communication. So it's important to recognize and manage these emotions and take a step back if you find yourself in those situations. Another challenge would be power dynamics. So power imbalances within relationships and hierarchies can create challenges in feedback exchanges. So in situations where there's a significant power difference between the feedback provider and the recipient might feel hesitant to express their thoughts, concerns, and disagreement. And this can hurt open and honest conversation and limit the effectiveness of feedback. So definitely think in terms of how to reduce power dynamics and the best way to provide feedback. I'm just doing a time check here, sorry. Cultural differences can also present another challenge. So cultural norms and communication styles might be different in how it's given and received. And so, for example, direct feedback might be acceptable in some cultures, while others may value indirect or implicit feedback. So being aware of those cultural differences and adapting to communication approaches can help to navigate these challenges and assure effective communication across cultural contexts. And finally, follow-up support. Providing feedback is not a one-time event. Ensuring that it leads to meaningful change and growth requires follow-up and ongoing support. So without that follow-up and support, it can become ineffective or forgotten. Providing resources, mentorship, additional guidance, these are all ways that you can provide follow-up and support. Oh, look, here's my graphic of hand with paper illustration. Just so you know, it should be there. It is not. I do not know why. One of the best ways to ensure that you both give and receive effective feedback is to create a feedback culture. This only happens when an organization or team creates a culture that prioritizes open and honest communication and feedback. So when this happens, people are more comfortable providing constructive feedback to their colleagues, managers, and superiors, and are also open to receiving feedback themselves. So creating a feedback culture helps an organization to have a growth mindset rather than to focus on perfection at all costs. So how do you do this? Continuous feedback is really important. So this is regular feedback that's provided by employees on their performance. So they help understand, where can I improve? Where are my strengths? How can I grow? So this can be done through one-on-ones. It can be done through reports on progress, talking about the challenges that they're facing or areas for improvement. These check-ins can be done weekly, bi-weekly, monthly. It just totally depends on your team. So assessing what are the team needs is really important. And I think that that's something that needs to be done fairly frequently, especially if your team's growing. So what their needs were yesterday might be way different in a month, depending on the growth or the change in direction of the team. Providing anonymous feedback channels. So this might be a suggestion form, an online feedback form, or an anonymous survey, but by keeping it anonymous, it allows employees to provide honest feedback without the fear of retribution. Peer feedback. So this is encouraging team members to provide feedback to each other, and that creates a culture of continuous improvement. So maybe you're working together on a project. Maybe you're doing code reviews for each other. Maybe you're reviewing blog posts. But those are all opportunities to provide feedback and to create a place where, like, hey, I want to help you to improve. I want to help you do better. I want to cheer you on for what you're doing. I want to acknowledge the strengths that you have. So it can be in that way. It could be during team meetings. It could be dedicated feedback sessions, but having that peer feedback also helps to create a trusting environment for your team. And then we have 360 feedback. This is more comprehensive. So it's promoting a culture of continuous feedback. So this means gathering feedback from a variety of sources. This could be peers, managers, direct reports, customers, or even clients. And so this is to get a holistic view of someone's performance and to help identify strengths and weaknesses for that person. There's also performance reviews. Regular performance reviews can provide an opportunity for employees to receive feedback on their performance and set goals for the future. I think one of the downfalls of performance reviews, if you are not creating a culture of feedback beyond performance reviews, which I often see in organizations, then you're often not going to get honest and open feedback in performance reviews. It's going to feel like, here's one more task that's added to my list, and I just want to get it done with. And I want to make sure that everybody knows that I support my teammate while I'm doing this. So always finding ways to provide constant feedback is going to be really important to ensuring some of these other ways work. And then there is the open door policy, which is having, when your employees, when your teammates, when people you're working with in a group feel comfortable sharing feedback with you, that's an open door policy. Okay, so discussing any concerns, fostering that culture of continuous feedback and letting folks know that it's always okay to provide me with feedback. And two-way communication. Feedback is not just one way from managers to employees. I think that it's really important for employees to also be able to provide feedback to managers and among the team members, because all of this shows that we're all working together to grow and to learn together. And that's what's really important in a feedback culture. I have accountability on that slide. It should not be there. I already talked about that. And so with this, I want to say that feedback is a gift, but it's a gift that needs to be given with the intention of helping and supporting those around you. It can be difficult. Sometimes you'll do your best, and sometimes it still won't be received well. That's okay. You'll learn and you'll grow in that situation. And the best thing that you can do is to continue to create a space that's supportive and conducive to feedback. And so remember, the last thing I'm going to say is the best way to provide feedback is to keep it honest, open, navigational, empathetic, specific, and timely. Thank you for listening to my talk on feedback. And if you have any feedback or questions now, I would appreciate it.
My feedback is I'm going to break all the rules. No, it's great. No, but it is very good. And thank you very much. And I think we got a couple folks in here, so we will open the floor to feedback and opinions and questions and comments. Go for it, everybody.
My feedback is, I love you handle errors and like typos and things like that with grace and humor, and that is lovely. It makes it easier to, I don't know, it's actually more engaging.
Thanks.
Reminds us that you're human. So
Julia says, deliberately put mistakes to humanize yourself to us.
that is not what I said. Not put words in my mouth.
I mean, it's a strategy, right?
Oops, look at this broken link.
Like study the optimal rate of errors.
I don't know what happened. Like suddenly my images are not. It's so weird. Oh, Canva. I'm gonna delete accountability right now before I forget. I think maybe some of these slides do you think I should break them down in, like that last one has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 bullet points, maybe breaking that into multiple slides with a little bit of information for each. Does that seem useful?
Yeah, I think I try to never have more than 5 bullet points on a slide. It was a little bit of a wall of text, which might be how the word accountability stayed there.
Yeah. Well, also I was like finishing it right before this, so like revising and I didn't think that I would have 50 minutes, and I actually skipped a couple of things and definitely made time. So there's no time for my group project.
Oh, well, okay. I tried to take notes and provide meaningful, actionable, the feedback things. I would agree with like having more slides. I think because the type of content, like keeping it like more visually dynamic would help people sort of keep track of like the different beats and not sort of like getting lost in the shuffle a bit. I might also suggest, so like at the end of the wrap up, I think this is probably worth like a key takeaways. Like there's enough content here that like by the end, like you're starting to like kind of lose track of what was happening at the beginning, and it's all good. But if there was a even just like a priority order, like you said, like start with truth, empathy and desire to help, and just like something that you go, okay, yeah, like these are the major things I need to hit. And the last thought was just, I think if you watch this recording, I don't exactly know how, but there's probably a way to organize it so that those parts that you covered could get trimmed. It feels like there are a few places where it's almost like a not obvious repetition, but it's like different flavors of the same thing.
Yeah, I
And
definitely got that. I was going to ask that too. Like if it felt repetitive in places, because I feel like I was saying it and I'm like, this feels very similar.
yeah, I would say like there are some parts in like the first 10 minutes and like the second 10 minutes, like it feels like there's a lot of overlap.
Okay.
But I don't have like an obvious solution of like, just take out this part. It's more like I feel like if you listen to it, you can probably see where, oh yeah, like this is probably covered here too.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you.
The actual content was like very useful. I really like the section talking about the boss and sort of that sort of like, oh, we're at a 4 out of 10, and like having to tease out, okay, but what does that mean? Like, how did we get here? I think there's like really good takeaways from like both sides of it, like detecting when you are. I think a lot of bosses don't realize when they sort of like trigger nervousness in their employees because they're being vague with their feedback, either through body language or like people can sense like something's wrong, but you haven't said what. And I kind of prefer like just let's hash this out, and then like empowering employees to like go to like, hey, we should talk about like where we're at, even if it means like breaking our standard feedback pattern. So I think that part was really good.
Something Kirk said made me think it might be nice to have like some kind of visual progress indicator during the talk. Like, you know, if you have a framework, putting that framework back up on the screen and showing like, here's where we are in the framework, something like that. Or,
cool.
And that can sometimes like, I always used to feel like when I was teaching, it was like, I am saying the same thing 75 times. I do not know why am I saying this so many times? And it's like, if you have a framework, then that repetition has a purpose, because you can be like, oh, the reason I'm saying this again is because like, let's go back and like,
Yeah, that's really good. That would be really helpful.
In the past, you've heard me talk about my troubles with feedback and how I didn't accept it well, or I don't believe it was given well. I think too many managers, team leads, etc., don't follow the practices you've given here about actually creating some rapport first, and then providing feedback that is supposed to be beneficial to the whole and the individual, and not just criticism. So I think what you've presented here would be very good for managers or new managers or team leads, et cetera, that haven't had formal training on it. This would benefit them greatly, so that rather than just once a quarter, because the company says I have to, spitting out some comments about you, it actually will teach them the real purpose of feedback, and not just checking a box in a to-do list. So I really appreciated it.
Thanks, Justin. I appreciate that.
That kind of makes me think, I have a very bold statement, which is if you are in a managerial position, like you almost, just to avoid that trap, it almost feels worth saying, like, you should get feedback like before you give it. Like
Mm,
before as a manager, like first, like you need to normalize your employees to like, this is like how to normalize, like this is a place where we encourage getting feedback. Like I'm gonna get it, like you're gonna do this to me. We're gonna talk about the good techniques. Like I'm gonna get that. And then we deal with like employee feedback. So like they know that that's established and it's not like they know it's not one-sided. And also sort of like forces you to confront, like, wait a minute, am I somebody who's not good? Because some people are like unaware, like, oh, I'm actually not good at receiving this. But you should kind of know, you know, there are people like, ah, this is how this comes across. Like, yeah, and like that's the thing that you've been doing, but it never happens to you. So you just thought it was fine. Yes, that'll be one of my rules when I come to power. I should wrap up this call, at least the recording part. To all those sort of watching at home or later on, and all of you who came today, thank you very much for being here. Thank you, Bekah, for what I think was like a lovely and informative talk, which I think had a bunch of like key things. I have a bunch of notes like I should do this more and I should do this more. I do like the fact that the recurring theme was, like start with truth, start with like empathy and like a sincere desire to help, and do like the checks necessary to ensure that like this is an environment where that can happen, and like if it's not, then you kind of know like where to start to tackle things. But I think that this was great. If you're watching and you want to do a cool talk like this, you absolutely can. You can just fill out the lunch and learn form and we will help you make that happen. And we try in this community to be a space where people have the opportunity to try a talk out, try to speak about something. It could be practice for something else. It could be just want to share to a small audience. It could be just that, hey, there's this cool thing and I want to tell other people. With that, I want to say, yeah, if you want to find out more, you can always check out our website, virtualcoffee.io. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you soon.